member and uh, yeah, okay. A board of directors member at both the national and provincial level. Additionally, I have just been acknowledged as a provisional psychologist and am now providing counseling services for my local branch in Alberta. The topic of men's issues is one that I have been passionate about for more than a decade now. I have been changing my direction in life in earnest when I began my work with my local crisis line, as well as 211, better known as the Community Resource Line. I was struck by how few resources there were available to men in need who would reach out to our lines. If a female victim of domestic abuse would reach out to us, I would have no fewer than 5 dedicated shelters I could offer in my city alone that would support them, to say nothing of the many other kinds of support I could present. But for men, virtually nothing, save for a few gender-neutral homeless shelters. It was at this point that I shifted my study focus in my master's degree to begin looking into men's issues, most specifically male victims of domestic abuse. I completed a literature review on the subject, detailing how to improve outcomes for male victims, that is now published in a peer-reviewed journal. It is also during this time that I discovered CAFE and the work it was doing for men's issues, and decided to become involved with the agency. I've been inspired in many ways by the work that CAFE has been doing, but unfortunately, along its journey, the agency has not been without its share of challenges in getting out this very important message. So that's what this presentation is about, exploring some of the roadblocks that CAFE has experienced, but also highlighting the many successes that we have achieved in spite of all that. Now, I'm a person who generally prefers to hear the bad news first, so I thought I would go ahead and start with some of the setbacks that we have encountered in our time. As many of you may be aware, if you put yourself out there as a champion of men's issues, there will be all kinds of people tripping over themselves to assume the worst about your intentions, and unfortunately, CAFE is no different. There have been a number of media hit pieces about CAFE over the years, associating us with more radical men's rights groups, accusing the organization of misogyny, and otherwise misrepresenting the views of those who work within the organization. For a broader example of this, one need only look at the Wikipedia page about CAFE, which is so biased, I would argue it borders on the libelous. The page features only a few of the earliest events involving the agency that were met with protests by feminist groups, and none of the massive successes the agency has had in creating valuable services for men in need. Unfortunately, these negative assumptions about our organization have not been limited to nasty articles and web pages. Such misconceptions about CAFE have led not only to events being faced with significant harassment from detractors, but also to our removal from several public events in the past, often with very little in the way of clearly defined reasons. One example of this happened during the planned Equality Day event in 2014, where the original venue for CAFE's activities withdrew their approval merely 3 days prior to the event due to external threats and harassment. Another such example involved the removal of CAFE from a yearly event in Toronto called the Cabbagetown Street Festival, based on the accusations of only one individual, despite CAFE's participation in the same event for years previously without issue. Based on similar accusations and assumptions about the work CAFE is doing, our agency was removed from Volunteer Toronto, an organization that helps connect potential volunteers with agencies in need of assistance. Interactions with some prominent organizations working in similar domains to CAFE have ranged from reluctance to outright hostility. Finally, our organization has oftentimes had more difficulty securing funding owing to various funders declining our applications based on misinformation about CAFE. There's no doubt about it, our organization has often had an uphill battle in terms of getting proper recognition for the importance of our cause. However, despite all of these struggles, CAFE has come to experience some enormous successes across the entirety of Canada, and I'd like to move on to those now. I don't think it is feasible for me to cover the entirety of CAFE's wins, so I'll try to draw attention to some of the highlights. First, CAFE has been involved in a number of different advocacy projects, bringing attention to a variety of men's issues. CAFE has launched several billboard advertising campaigns targeting parental alienation and fatherlessness, male victims of domestic violence, and suicide awareness and prevention. We have created a video and podcast series through our YouTube channel addressing many different topics and hosting several prominent members of the community involved in men's issues. CAFE co-produced a documentary called Erasing Family, which focuses on the topic of parental alienation and its devastating consequences on parents and children alike. CAFE completed a major research project entitled Studying Male Homelessness as a Consequence of Domestic Violence, the first Canadian study to explore policies to assist this vulnerable demographic. In addition to all this, CAFE has in the past regularly met with legislators from all levels of government to advocate for inclusive policies targeting all members of society, including, quite naturally, men and boys. A significant part of the advocacy CAFE is responsible for involves the production and hosting of public events meant to draw attention to these issues. Since our inception in 2013, we have hosted a considerable variety of speakers, including academics, journalists, educators, professionals, and other popular figures involved in men's issues. Some examples of the public programs we've hosted: Disappearing Dads, How Children Suffer When We Demonize Fathers, with a panel including a child psychologist, forensic family counselor, and both a criminal and family lawyer. Serving as a co-sponsor of the Toronto First Responders Unity Festival. Hosting a major public forum exploring Bill C-51, tabled in the Canadian legislature as a response to the Me Too movement. Hosting several screenings of Cassie Jay's documentary, The Red Pill, a film examining several aspects of men's issues and the men's rights movement. Hosting screenings of our co-produced documentary, Erasing Family, across Canada. Hosting several training and demonstrative presentations for a number of prominent organizations, including Ontario 211, City of Toronto Shelter Administration, Oxford College Paramedics, and many other mental health and education-based programs. Hosting Healing Journeys 2018, an annual national conference focused on men, trauma, and mental health. And of course, our own National Men's Issues Conference for 4 years running, Momentum, which has been hosted both in person and virtually to accommodate the pandemic and has included dozens of prominent speakers and hundreds of attendees. These are only just a few examples of a long list of presentations and conferences in which we have been involved. However, even beyond these, CAFE has been involved in men's issues in the legal system and in the government as well. Some examples of our participation in this manner are as follows. In 2016, CAFE joined the Ontario Legal Aid Long-Term Domestic Violence Strategic Planning Committee, which convened 2 special sessions to focus on the research concerning violence and male victimization. CAFE, by invitation, presented to the Toronto Police Domestic Violence Advisory Committee on the subject of male domestic violence victimization. Legal Aid Ontario authorized CAFE to provide 2-hour legal aid certificates for male victims of family violence. CAFE was invited to inform family mediation agencies operating out of the family law information clinics at family courthouses in Toronto concerning coercive control in situations of family breakdown. CAFE partnered with City of Toronto's affordable housing agency, Housing Connections, as part of their priority program for victims of domestic abuse. In 2018, CAFE commissioned a poll by the firm Nanos Research to explore public attitudes towards shared parenting. The response showed 70% of Canadians favor shared parenting and only 13% oppose. This poll was only one of a number of steps CAFE took to advocate for improvements to the Bill C-78 Divorce Act to enshrine equal parenting into law. While the legislation passed without our suggested reforms, we continue to advocate for the importance of shared parenting. Again, these represent only a small amount of the work that CAFE has been doing. I'd like to take a little time now to talk about our service branch of the organization, the Canadian Centre for Men and Families, and some of the amazing services that we have been building for men and boys in need. We opened the first CCMF office, CCMF Toronto, back in September of 2014. This served as our first dedicated hub through which to provide direct services to men. The initial services at this location included peer support, legal services, and a counseling program. These programs eventually expanded to include a fathering after separation or divorce program, a support group for domestic violence victims, and programs specific to helping LGBTQ plus men and fathers. As interest in our services grew, we began to expand our services to other cities. In 2017, we opened our Canadian Centre for Men and Families branch in Ottawa, and in the following year, we opened a branch in St. Thomas as well to serve the needs of Western Ontario. Following that, we began our Western expansion campaign. This campaign culminated in the formal opening of CCMF Alberta and Calgary in early 2020 and CCMF Vancouver in late 2021. During this time, we also opened another branch in York region, and we are hoping to continue to expand to other provinces to be able to assist a wider population of men. However, if we can attribute anything positive to the COVID-19 pandemic, it is that we made a concerted effort to expand our services to be accessible in an online format. Because of this, we now offer all of our available services online, which allows many men to access our services who may otherwise be unable to attend in person. However, I'd like to take time at the end of this presentation to talk now about one of our most significant achievements, which was to open the Family Shelter for Men and Children in Toronto, the first dedicated father and child domestic abuse shelter in Canada. This shelter has now served dozens of men and their children needing shelter from abusive partnerships, and there is now a significant wait list to access the shelter. The success of the shelter has drawn the support of many groups and important figures, including City of Toronto officials and the Toronto Police. As a result of the resounding success of this shelter, we are now looking to expand shelter operations to other provinces as well, with plans in the works to develop shelters in Calgary. With all of these efforts and successful endeavors, I would like to now draw attention to one final thing. I think that one component of the success of CAFE is that all of the members involved, staff and volunteers alike, understand the importance of supporting men where they are at, of treating men with dignity and respect. In my years of experience in examining services that purport to help men in need, unfortunately, many of them come with a number of caveats, negative assumptions, victim blaming, or even just helping men from an outsider's perspective. That is, telling men what they should do in order to heal. But one of the things I truly appreciate about the work CAFE does is that at its fundamental core, it is about helping men in the way they feel they need help, no strings attached. I'm proud to be a part of this agency, and I hope that as our successes continue to grow, our struggles become less and less as others come to see the benefits of truly caring for men in need.
Thank you so much for that presentation. We're now going to move to Justin Trottier. All right, just give us a little bit of time to set up. Thank you.
Hello, can you guys hear me? Hello, hello.
Hello. Yeah. This is working now? Yeah. Oh, I see. Okay, great. Hey, Tanis, thanks for that. Great talk. What we're going to do is maybe a little bit different from what's in your program. So I'll go through a quick kind of course correction. The program has me speaking twice. I thought you probably don't need two of me, but I think instead of two of me, you get one of me and you get one of this guy. So I'm just going to introduce who this is here. This is Kevin Areola. Kevin has a really interesting story to share. It really builds on what you've heard from Tanis. He was a student at Ryerson University and the co-founder of the men's issues group there on campus, and had some interesting experiences trying to get a men's group started at a university campus in Canada. And I think what happened to him, I would describe it as a bit of a microcosm of those ups and downs that Tanis laid out. So when I come back and do my presentation, I'm going to build on Tanis and Kevin's remarks and experiences and talk about what lessons we've learned and how we can find common ground and try to depolarize the gender discourse and try to make collaborative relationships work in the best interests of men and women. But I want you to hear from Kevin, and I think there's a lot to learn from the insights of his experience. So please. Put this on. All right.
Hello, everyone. I wasn't sure if I was going to be here today, so I kind of slapped this together a bit last minute. Thank you, Justin, for inviting me. So yeah, my name's Kevin. I'm here because Justin asked me to speak a little bit about the group I founded, which was called the Men's Issues Awareness Society at Ryerson. And how that's connected to CAFE and the CCMF. So just to jump right into it, why I got into men's issues and why I started this group. So I had always rooted for the underdog. And this was because I always felt like the underdog growing up. In my life, I went through certain hardships, including my parents going to prison. And it just made me, it just made it difficult for me to deal with life. I had issues in school, issues connecting to people, and eventually I had issues with addiction. So I always rooted for the underdog, and I was mistrustful of authority. And this led me into an interest in civil rights and the politics program that I eventually entered at Ryerson University. So entering my 4th year at university, I went to an event hosted by CAFE, and I got to speak with Justin. And I told him that there should be a men's issues group at Ryerson. I heard about one at U of T, and I told him that there should be one at Ryerson. And he encouraged me to do it, encouraged me to start it. And I guess I got a wave of energy that night, and I did it. I created an online presence. I started recruiting on campus. I got 2 executives to join me in starting this group. Both of them were women, and about 50% of the members who joined were men and 50% were women, approximately. And then that's when the controversy started. We were opposed by other groups, including the Feminist Collective at Ryerson and the Women in Trans Collective, and as well as members of the Ryerson Student Union. And this was all over Twitter before we had even come on campus to recruit, before they even knew what we were about. People were just immediately against us. And, you know, the accusations of misogyny were right off the bat. But what this did was it created enough controversy to get attention from reporters. And that started off as just university reporters. And then eventually it grew to, you know, everyone else. So we applied and we were denied on the basis that we would bring violence against women on campus and misogyny, simply because we wouldn't call ourselves a feminist group. I didn't want the label. I thought, you know, if people want to call themselves feminists and join, that's fine, but I didn't want to be called a feminist group. So we fought it. We appealed the decision. We went through all the avenues at the university to try to get our group ratified by the student union. And all along, CAFE was there lending support for events that we hosted as an unofficial group. They did it by connecting us with speakers at our request, and helping us connect with students from other universities, including Simon Fraser University in British Columbia, and the group that they had started over there, that they were actually successful in forming. So when we ran out of options for the appeal, I again went to Justin. I said, is there anything we can do? And he connected us with the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. And they helped us take the Ryerson Student Union to court to appeal this decision. In court, we ended up losing. The court did say in their judgment that student unions must follow their own rules. However, the court just felt that there wasn't enough to rule in our favor, unfortunately. So did we succeed or did we fail? Well, we failed to become an official group. Whatever. We succeeded in broadcasting our message far greater than we could have ever hoped for. I mean, they tried to silence us, but in doing so, they just blew up our voice more than they could have ever dreamed of. Instead of us being a little local group where maybe only the people of our university heard about us, we were featured on every major newspaper in Canada. The CBC and the National did a televised special on us. So we got our message out there. Oh, and also even like foreign newspapers were contacting me, wanting to hear about this. As well, this is just like a little personal story. My best friend's mom is a teacher, and one time she was asking all the kids what had they heard about in the news. Not really this, but just it was just a general discussion. And one little girl said, "I heard about this group that wanted to start a men's group in university, my group, and they didn't let them, and I don't think that's right." So that's my personal favorite story, because it means that, you know, somebody heard. Anyways, so and the last thing is that I feel like our group was just a small part of a much larger movement to destigmatize men's issues. And now today I see a little bit of that. Just the other week, a UFC fighter that goes by the name of Paddy the Baddy, after his win, he talked about how men, his friend had committed suicide, and he talked about how men should go and seek help if they need it. So I think we're starting to see some changes, and maybe that's anecdotal, but I really feel that's the direction that we're going in. Now, personally, CAFE has really helped me a lot. When I was going through my mental health issues, they connected me with a counselor. And it's partly because of them and my family and Cocaine Anonymous and Alcoholics Anonymous that I'm over a year sober today. Thank you. And, you know, Justin, he's a personal mentor of mine. And I would also say that he's also a friend. Thank you.
Aspects of your story. Don't go far. You too, Tanis. Hope you're still there. It's still on, right? I never know. So I'm gonna give some remarks as well, and then we'll sort of close the panel, the three of us forming a panel, and then we're gonna do Q&A. I know there's some questions that have come in online. You might have questions as well. Hope we get a bit of a conversation going, and then there is a fourth presentation, which is external, I guess, to our panel, and that will be a video that will be played towards the end. So just to give you a bit of context for how this is going to go. So yeah, as I said, I wanted to first of all thank Tanis and Kevin for giving you a sense of a bit of the roller coaster ride of ups and downs that it's like to found and manage an organization in this space. And what I wanted to do now would take things from there and now kind of synthesize some of the lessons that we've learned over the years as an organizations. Despite the obstacles we've had, as you've heard, we've also enjoyed some successes. So I guess the obvious question is, how were those accomplished? And what lessons can we learn that are applicable beyond the experiences of a single agency? So let me just recapitulate a little bit of history, which I think is I can build on here. When we founded Canadian Association for Equality in 2012, our initial focus was on public events and advocacy exclusively. This was pre-services. And it did give us a considerable profile doing these big kind of splashy activities. And it opened us up, as you've heard, to some constant streams of attack. Many of our early events served as lightning rods, attracting angry protesters. Now, this transformed almost overnight when our agency began to move from that focus into a combined focus on events and on social services. That really changed everything. And there's a number of reasons for that. First of all, short public events, I think they tend to keep things rather superficial, and it's just very hard in 1 hour or maybe 2 hours to really dive deeply enough into a topic that you can hope to eventually common ground with individuals not already predisposed to your way of thinking. Events are great, don't get me wrong, they build your base, they arm your supporters with information, but I don't think it's likely the right forum for building coalitions among people with different philosophies. But in offering services, we've had a lot of people that now reach out to us because they need those services, or their loved ones need those services, or maybe it's an agency and their clients need those services. And the service focus has shifted people's responses away from a focus on our ideology to a pragmatic interest in what we can provide to them. And that's really broken down barriers. Over time, we've even become well recognized as authorities in various areas of service delivery, to the point that agencies now come to us to deliver trainings or tutorials or workshops or webinars to their staff. So ironically, we're now back to delivering events with more or less the same content, the same themes, but we're actually delivering them now inside of agencies. And to double the irony, these agencies, because they generally operate in the social service sector, usually it's a room full of mostly female staff that we're now delivering the same kind of events to. So now we're kind of on the inside. Just as an aside, you've already heard some of the agencies that we work with. I just wanted to add to this list, just to give you a sense that these are very, mainstream established organizations that we're talking about: Victim Services of Toronto and other regions, Legal Aid Ontario, the Ontario Network of Sexual Assault and Domestic Violence Treatment Centers, works predominantly with female victims of domestic violence, sexual assault. Not anymore. Now they're broadening out. Canadian Mental Health Association, and even a number of university and college professors have had us come into their classrooms to deliver these workshops. A Seneca College Social Services class has had us in multiple times, and an early childhood education class out of Fanshawe College in London, Ontario, has had us in multiple times as well. Now, a key strategy that we employ in seeking to build this common ground around policy or legislative projects is to show how men's perspectives and women's perspectives are really, in my opinion, two sides of the same coin. This is a thing I want to get into now. I think we need to start emphasizing the deep connection between men's issues and women's issues. I'm going to give you some examples to illustrate this. There are 3 or 4 examples that I'm going to get into now. So the first one has to do with recruitment into careers. We know that there are many efforts to recruit women and girls into the STEM programs and other professions which have traditionally been dominated by men. That's all good, I'm for that. But what if we had the same enthusiasm for recruiting boys and men into teaching, into early childhood education, into nursing, into social work, and into other professions historically dominated by women? These are not 2 different projects. These are the same project. Because if men are attracted into these unconventional but highly rewarding professions, then more spots open up in the STEM world for women. The point is, it's not a competition. When we teach boys and girls that all options are on the table, that they need not feel limited by gender stereotypes, then young people will be empowered to make choices that are true to who they are, which means more fulfilling lives for people of all genders. Now let's consider our advocacy for family law reform, or the rebuttable presumption of equal parenting. You've heard a lot about that. You already know, I think most of you in this room, the long list of benefits a child enjoys when they grow up with a strong and loving relationship with their dad. And since we all care about children, that should serve as a common ground. I would add to that, women also benefit directly when more responsibility for childcare is placed on men. Because should custody arrangements favor increased time with dad, mom may be freed up to re-enter the workforce or to advance further in her career. The continued incentivization for women to remain primary caregiver enshrines an unhelpful gender binary. I would say women's equality in the workplace is directly linked to men's equality in parenting. In fact, this was the argument that led the Quebec government in 2006 to create a use it or lose it 5-week paid paternity program, which was exclusively available to dads. And it was a huge success. Within 10 years, the percentage of dads using parental benefits jumped from 28% before the program to 86%. That's a staggering jump. But meanwhile, in the rest of Canada, during that same period, the numbers barely moved from 11% to 12%. And why is that? Because without a separate paid paternity program that was dedicated to dads, that only dads could take, mothers and fathers were left to negotiate who would take time off. Because women on average do tend to occupy lower paying jobs, most families would choose for mom to take that leave. And that would have negative consequences on her career advancement opportunities. This is actually one of the reasons for the apparent gender wage gap, which harms women. And it's intimately connected, as we've seen, to how we miss opportunities to promote fatherhood, which harms men. And finally, let's look at family violence. Failing to address men as victims directly impacts women and children in two significant ways. The first is bilateral violence, as we've heard about today, the last couple of days. It turns out that our inability to imagine domestic violence as anything other than male perpetrator, female victim, is actually one way in which we're keeping women at risk. That's because the most common form of domestic violence is bilateral violence, perpetrated by mutually violent couples. And that is a scenario in which women are at particularly high risk of injury. According to a study by the US Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, mutual violence can often escalate over time and results in a higher likelihood of greater injury compared to situations of unilateral violence. And so when we are sensitized to the victimization of both men and women, we may find opportunities to block that escalation of mutually violent couples, reducing the chance that a woman or a man will be seriously injured. I wanted to quote, this is interesting, I think, from Pamela C. Alexander. She's of the Wellesley Center for Women. She wrote a book, Intergenerational Cycles of Trauma and Violence, 2015. And she wrote, quote, "The inattention to women's violence, either in mutually violent relationships or unidirectionally violent relationships, keeps women vulnerable in the current relationship as they fail to seek help and minimize their partner's behavior, in part because of their own violence. And it keeps them at risk for finding themselves again and again in new abusive relationships." The second way that domestic abuse is a non-binary issue is the intergenerational transmission of family violence. Because regardless of gender, it turns out that individuals who suffer family violence as children are more likely to perpetuate domestic abuse as adults or to find themselves in adult relationships of abuse. The severe long-term effects on children of growing up exposed to family violence includes antisocial behavior, along with substance abuse, bullying, etc. And according to the 2014 General Social Survey, this is done by the Canadian, by Statistics Canada, so it's domestic here, 51% of both male and female victims of spousal abuse reported that their children had witnessed the abuse committed against them. With some domestic violence being intergenerational, family violence may take the form of a female perpetrator and a male victim in one generation, but then it gets flipped and there's a male victim, and there's a female victim and a male perpetrator the next generation. The point is that intervention programs that break the cycle of violence, whether it's within those bilaterally violent relationships or by supporting victims of one generation in the hopes of stopping that transmission of violence through the generations, those offer the best chance of improving the health of children, families, and communities. These arguments, in fact, were convincing enough that senior staff from some leading agencies within the violence against women sector actually joined the advisory board for our Family Shelter Project. And these individuals, I think they should be named because they deserve credit for this bravery. Margaret Arneson, she's a manager at the Assaulted Women's Helpline, is on our advisory board. Caitlin Anastasiou, Education Committee Chair of the Ontario Network of Sexual Assault Treatment Centers, is on our advisory board. And more recently, Sharon Hurd, she's former president of the BC Society of Transition Houses. Just to give you a sense, it's not all about Ontario. She's also recently joined that same board. Now, I want to change gears and look at how we have worked to depolarize the gender discourse through the positioning of our organization. I think there's lessons here for others to pick up on. So one thing that's striking about CAFE is that we are neither anti-feminist nor pro-feminist. We are neither anti-MRA nor are we pro-MRA, men's rights advocacy, if you know that acronym. We embrace individuals instead of all ideological persuasions. Our common currency as an organization is our statement of values. And that statement speaks of our commitment to freedom of thought, facts and evidence, peaceful dialogue, transparency and accountability, things we hope everybody can agree on. So we're non-ideological, and that means that individuals may have their ideologies, but as an organization, we strive to be above that. We focus instead on improving the lives of people and finding solutions to problems. Labels, just as an aside, but I can't help it, labels like feminist and men's rights activist, I think that they're used more to divide people and to close conversations. I want to open conversations. Some people find it convenient to dismiss people or groups they don't like by just labeling them with a term they assume will provoke in others fear or hatred. We cannot play on these negative emotions, which serve only to divide people on ideological grounds. And in my opinion, they do nothing to help those in need. I've been talking, I think, about substance, but I also want to emphasize that style and strategy are also very important when you're trying to depolarize and find common ground. So here are some ideas. First, on style. So when you communicate, I would advise you make it matter of fact, non-provocative, and that you don't seem defensive. Avoid making generalizations, all women this, all men that, all feminists this. Emphasize inclusivity, men and families. Give women in your organization a prominent voice. As we've seen from the We for He panel and other events, women can be some of the most important and effective champions, not just for their own male loved ones, but in general for this cause. I think a big part of the problem is actually social media and mainstream media, both of which reward provocative and radical voices, often pitting them against each other in battles. Instead, I would like us to speak to the center, referencing the extremes on either side by way of distinguishing yourself from them and establishing your moderate and mainstream position. Here are some tips. This is what we share with our social media communications team. I can't say they always follow them exactly to the letter, but we wish that they would get close to it. So we say, be fair-minded, be non-argumentative, do not take the bait, respond positively, switch tones if it's negative, if it's going negative. Do not get sidetracked, try to redirect to core issues and problems. Never, ever be sarcastic in your responses. Try to build relationships, not destroy them, and be generous and collaborative in your tone. And second, on strategy. A little bit of insider baseball, but maybe some of these ideas will bear some fruit for you. Know your audience. Don't use language that will only serve to provoke, to trigger, or to shut down conversation. Also, know who your real audience is. It may not be the person you're talking to if other people are watching. Some audiences are amenable to statistics. Others respond better to narrative and storytelling. That means sometimes your best spokesperson is a professor with an academic background. Other times it might be an individual, man or woman, who's been personally affected by these issues. In some contexts, it may be best to keep silent or wait until everyone in the room has shared their feedback before you talk. Then when you do share your position, you can build more effectively on what others have said. Know what hills to die on. It may be necessary to avoid a skirmish one day to win the battle the next day. You may, for example, need to build an alliance with someone who isn't fully on board ideologically or philosophically, but whose support is critical to some bigger project. Give people and agencies the benefit of the doubt. Agencies, as we've learned, are not monoliths. We've discovered that while senior staff are often wedded to ideology, frontline workers are more likely to have dealt with men in crisis. And it's among frontline workers that you are likely to find partners who look beyond ideology because they share your focus on finding solutions to real problems. Know that change will come incrementally. You cannot hope to convince everyone to give up a deeply held belief that they've been indoctrinated into overnight. You may be able, however, to plant a seed of doubt or simply a critical thought based on looking at a new perspective that you could share. Look at change not as all or none, but rather as moving people along an ideological continuum based on where they currently situate themselves. So you need to study up on your audiences very carefully. Sometimes the best you can do, in fact, is to turn an opponent into a neutral party. But that could be valuable when what you're trying to do is build coalitions, and your concern is that some members of that coalition are vulnerable to intimidation from those opponents. Know how to play chess, and here's an example of that. I mentioned the Family Shelter Advisory Board, so I'm gonna pull back towards that example and kind of build on it a little bit. When we decided that it was important to have this advisory board, we came to believe from previous conversations that some senior people in the violence against women, the VAW sector, might consider joining that board. But the trick then became, what order do we invite them in? Because we knew that very few people would want to be the first to sign on as early, adopters of this novel idea. We also knew that those that did sign on early might be vulnerable to attack from extremists within their own movement. And in fact, one or two early adopters actually had to withdraw their support because of that intimidation. So what we had to do was to build careful relationship webs, knowing who knew who respected who. And as one supporter signed on, we could then get other people in their network to sign on as well. Eventually, as support grew and as safety in numbers became a reality, we could then approach other people up the food chain. We now have an advisory board of 16 senior people out of the VAW sector, the victim services sector, et cetera, et cetera. I'm sorry if this may sound a little bit convoluted, but that's what I meant by a chess game. But sometimes it is about building those pieces carefully to make common cause. And lastly, remain patient, open-minded, and understand that change will take years, if not decades. We must be in this for the long game, but what's at stake is important enough, I think, to keep us engaged for our whole lives, I should hope. So I'm gonna end there, and I'm gonna ask Tanis to stand by, and Kevin is right here. So we're gonna go to questions. Are we good? Do we have some time for Q&A? Yeah. Thank you. So,
Thank you very much. I enjoyed the presentations from each of you. I have much respect to each of you. I'm interested in what your perspective is in the social acceptability of the kind of work that you're doing evolving over time. Are you seeing cracks in the edifice or sunnier skies in terms of acceptability for men's issues and support for those in the community?
I'll tackle this first and then hand it over to Kevin. I think so. I mean, I've been in this for about a decade now, and it's a bit hard to tease out different factors because the organization's focus, as I was saying, has shifted, and I think it's that shift has made it easier for people to work with us, you know, as I've described. But even having said that, even the time that we've been concerned so primarily with social services, I've noticed that we're getting a lot more invitations to come into agencies and deliver our programs, deliver our trainings, our webinars, et cetera. That the extent of the thirst to hear what we have to say, I don't have a graph I can plot, you know, this like a trend line for you, but my intuition is that has been kind of ramping up. And there does seem to have been a point where like an inflection point I think was reached. I think it was maybe when we started talking about opening the shelter, that a lot of people started to get excited about that and to come on board. I think when you have an exciting project that is so clearly going to transform a lot of people's lives in a positive way, a couple of things happen. People get excited by that. It turns out a lot of agencies wanted to do something like this, but they didn't know where to start, or they were mandated only to support women, maybe by their funders, et cetera. But they were very willing to provide support to us to do this. But at the same time, it became harder for opponents to keep whining that these MRA groups don't do anything good. I mean, we're talking about opening a shelter. That's clearly a beneficial cause. So it sort of silenced the critics, it empowered the supporters, but you have to find those projects that really galvanize people. So I think that's internal to the organization, that's been one of the reasons why this support has started to be more available to us. But even looking beyond the insider perspective of Cafe, I would say just kind of looking at the news and looking at one area that I always look at like the advertisements. Like advertisements, are they featuring dads or are they only featuring moms, on billboard ads or on product labels? And again, I don't have research on this. I'd like to see the research done. It looks like there's more of an interest to show fathers in situations of caretaking, caregiving, and that sort of thing. So I'm not sure if there's something to that, but I think people have started to catch on in the executive, advertising rooms, that men are stepping up increasingly as full-time dads, and there needs to be some catching up by the companies, that are marketing their products to parents to acknowledge that change is happening. So that is one change I've noticed. Do you want to comment on any? So.
Yeah, I mean, this is probably just all anecdotal, but I have noticed certain shifts in media talking about men's issues, as Justin said, where they're showing men in more of like a caretaking role. I do spend a lot of time online. That's probably one addiction I haven't dealt with yet. But I have noticed that even online, there's less vitriol, less ugliness between this like gender war that was happening in the 2010s around there. Like even on, I don't know, I go on Reddit a lot. Even on Reddit, there was this subgroup called Against Men's Rights. They were very active when I was doing my group, and now like barely anybody goes on that. So I don't know. Again, this is all anecdotal, but I do see a shift, and including that little story about Patty the Batty talking about how men should seek help if they're going through mental health crisis, and that was at a big UFC event. And apparently, men seeking help did go up, I think, in hotlines or something after that. I read an article. Yeah, so that's my personal opinion.
I don't know if, I was going to say, I don't know if I can add to this, but what I have found, kind of to Justin's point and what he was speaking about, is that a big help with this is the way that you approach the issues. Now, for me, the way that I was dealing with this was in my master's degree, and talking with other students in the cohort, there would often be subjects that would talk about, you know, supposed underprivileged groups, or would claim that men have more privilege. But if you come into the discussion in a gentle way, providing examples where, you know, men may be struggling, I find that people often have a harder time disputing that. And in fact, people will feel empowered to speak up and share their own examples to those ends as well. So it really is in how you approach people. And I think that because of the approach that CAFE as a whole has taken in talking with other agencies, I really think that that's having a lot of positive effect on other people being willing to work with us and support our causes.
Yeah. Is it on? Oh, okay. Okay, perfect. Yeah, like I'm always afraid that if we don't have public space for men's issues, that men will actually seek help with their issues from more ideologist movements like manosphere or like incels. So my question is, if you had like if you share that fear, and if you had interactions with people kind of sympathizing with those more extreme groups within like men's rights movement.
Yeah, no, thanks for that question. I'm just struggling a bit with the answer because we know people come to us when they're struggling with crisis. We don't know, of course, what they would do if we weren't around, and we also don't know who's not coming to us. So I can't say if there's a giant community of men that unfortunately we're not reaching because they don't see any hope, I guess, in handling their issues through counseling, legal aid clinics, and the sort of support that we provide. So they just go quickly to the more extreme sides. However, I think if we can find ways of making our approach attractive and giving hope and making sure that men know that their problems are not unsolvable and that there are ways of solving them that are healthy, not just for them, but for their loved ones, giving them that option can't be a bad thing, because before that option really wasn't available. And so it does add to their options. And so hopefully many of them would choose that positive route. It's all, I think, about kind of rewards and punishments. Like if you punish men when they finally ask for help, then yeah, you're going to push them to the extreme. If you reward them and you don't victim blame them and you don't shame them and you believe them, then there's more chance that they're going to think that, okay, so there's something to this avenue, this positive avenue for support, and they'll double down on that. So all we can do is try to reach men, as Tanis made this point, on their own terms, you know, not from the perspective of some other group that's trying to fix men, but on their own terms, based on what men truly need, speaking their language. And that's proven to be attractive to a lot of men because our clientele is large and growing. But I guess, to be honest about my answer to your question, we just can't know about the communities that we're that are not reaching out to us because we don't have interaction with them. I think, Candice, did you want to get in on that? You probably
Sure. Just briefly, I really think that people, they don't want to feel angry most of the time. Like in most cases, people don't want to feel angry. They don't want to feel like they don't belong anywhere. So if we can provide that community where, they feel like they belong, they feel like they can actually be heard, and that, we're not secretly just pointing our finger at them saying, this is the way you should change in order to be better. I think that will be attractive to most men, because then, they'll feel like, wow, somebody actually cares about me, right? Somebody actually wants me to be able to do better.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much for your. So we're just gonna do one online and then we're gonna move back to in person, okay? So we have a question from Ken. This is kind of just a technical question. He was asking, what is the relationship between the organizations, specifically referring to CAFE and CCMF?
a common question. Some people in this room, I think, would like to answer that one too. So the CAFE was the original name for the organization, still the legal name of the organization. It's what we incorporated under in 2012. We decided to name the Center for Men and Family as we did because it was a more descriptive name for a facility that operated social services, mental health services for boys, men, fathers, and families. And then the Centers for Men and Families started to grow and get a life of their own to the point where that brand has come to compete somewhat, I guess, with the CAFE brand. And there's actually, I think, very productive conversations ongoing internal to the organization about how to deal with these two brands and how to either integrate them or how to prioritize one or the other. So kind of stay tuned to how we work that one out. But it's one organization, legally speaking, that's under the legal name Canadian Association for Equality. The CCMF is what we call those facilities that we now operate in 6 locations, 4 in Ontario and 1 in Alberta, 1 in BC.
So for me personally, I'm a member of the Thursday Night Sofa Group, CCMF. I know that you talk about victims for this stages, although reaching out. Just wondering if there asking for presentations or wanting to become involved.
I guess CAS is maybe one of the last bastions that are holding out a little bit. We engage with them, but have they had us in to do presentations? Not that I'm aware of at any of our branches. We do have a member of CAS Children's Aid Society, Toronto, on that advisory board, but they joined fairly recently, and just to be honest, they haven't contributed much. So we hear from them on a case-by-case basis. Sometimes they connect with us to get more information about a family they're dealing with, or sometimes we reach out to them to try to see if they can support a family we're dealing with. But it's been a fairly cold relationship, I would say, with them. I mean, I don't want to overemphasize that, because across the sector, we've had great relationships with many other agencies. We've listed them, Tennis has listed them. One I didn't mention earlier is the Toronto Police. By invitation, we're now part of a very important Toronto Police and United Way joint effort called Focus Toronto, which is a community response program. Many agencies are part of this. And what happens is they bring high-risk situations to these tables once a week, and agencies collaborate on providing support. These are families that, if sort of left to their own devices, they'd probably become victims of crime, or they'd interact with the law in some way or another. So Toronto Police wants to intervene before they, fall victims in that way. It's a great program. And about a year ago, when we opened the shelter, we got a call from the police. Do you want to join Focus? You're a valuable player. And so now we're actually part of all the Focus tables across the city. So I just want to counterbalance what I'm saying about CES, because I don't want you to think, agencies are not working with us. That particular one has been more difficult to crack into. I understand. Tennis out of Alberta might have a more more to say about, I don't know if it's called CS there, but child protection agencies out in the prairie provinces. Have we had more luck there, Tanis?
To be honest, I don't know about our current status in liaisoning with children's services. I know at the moment we have been speaking a lot with other domestic violence shelters, most specifically targeted towards women in the area, and we've actually been gaining a lot of ground. There is a lot of growing understanding that the way male victims of abuse deal with their situation is different from women's, and their needs are different often as well. So we are often having a lot of luck in talking to other agencies and having them kind of be at least understanding of that, if not outright, asking for our input on how to best help those individuals in need. So we are gaining ground in a variety of ways.
Thanks, Tanis. I should also say we've got Beth Barbary and Sean McMurtry, heads of our Alberta team here in the audience. If you want to add anything to any of this, please speak up. Shall we go to another question?
Yeah, okay, so now we're just gonna move on to an online question. I'm trying to make this as fair as possible, so apologies. But if Ender could please turn on your mic to ask a question, and we can hear you.
Hi, folks. My name is Inder. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, great. I hear Tanis there leaning in to listen in on the questions. I hope you can hear me better. Okay, excellent. Yeah, hi. Thank you so much, Justin, and everybody else involved in this for this conference. This is tremendous to see this kind of effort being made. I am calling you, I am right now in, actually sitting in Florida right now, but I'm a US citizen. I've lived in USA for 50 years. I'm an alienated dad of 2 adult children who are now 30 years old. I've only seen them 1 year out of their lives. And what interested me about these topics is that in USA here, we have something called WAWA, which hopefully when I cross the border, when I get my work permit in a couple of months, I wanted to deal with WAWA anymore. But Violence Against Women's Act is a legislation that was put in place by actually our current president, President Biden, back in '94. And it was put in place with all sort of good intent. And in my case, what happened was that, I am a US citizen. I married a young lady from India. She came to USA in '92. We lived together for 4 years. We had 2 children. And this is somebody who's lived in New Delhi all her life, and she came all the way on the other side of the planet, and we lived together, had 2 children, and naturally we were having arguments and such. And so after 4 years, I made a suggestion. I said, why don't we take a little bit of cooler break, and why don't you go back home and see your parents, and then we'll resume after, and then we'll pick up and find the best path forward. Well, this young lady, unbeknownst to me, was being guided by some women's groups, behind my back. They told her, they were educating her on how to go and present her story to the family court. She went to family court. She told them that this fellow is saying that I'm going to ship you back to India. And this fellow and his mother are saying that we're going to ship you back to India. We're never going to let you see your kids again. Well, you can imagine what happened after that, with a complaint like that, especially under WAWA. WAWA has very specific guidelines for immigrants, and where the immigrants, what they are saying gets looked at without even having a word with me, the perpetrator. And this all happened without even a word with me. She got her green card behind my back. She went ahead and she was able to get her family to come to America within a couple of years. The kids are now so brainwashed that they don't see any value whatsoever in a biological father. They think a biological father is, they literally see zero value in a biological father. And this young lady has brought her own father into the country, and they think that grandparents are everything in the world, and they feel that it's okay to not have a father involved. So the courts, of course, now the kids are almost 30 years old. The courts feel that they rendered justice in so-called best interest of the child. And so they're done. They feel that they've done their part. They're out of there. And now it's when I talk to folks like Dr. Coleman, I invited the kids to reunification therapy. And my mother passed away 4 years ago, so I figured one bad person that was bothersome to them so much before being out of the picture would be helpful to them. But they have zero interest in reunification therapy. They don't want any involvement. They feel that the courts have empowered them so much, they don't feel that they have to look back. Nobody has, the system is like Dr. Coleman was describing in the main morning session. There's, there is no vested, they're in therapy and such, everybody's told to think of individualistic manner, not from a family perspective. So,
Sorry to cut in there. I think in the interest of time, we're going to have to ask you to go to the question. You have other people who want to.
Okay, yeah, my question is basically this. In USA, of the various conferences I've attended over the last 25 years, the main one I attended in 2019 in Kentucky, and there were some legislators who put together legislation to remove, to put together a default joint custody. Whenever somebody makes an allegation, default, it should be equal joint custody. And a lot, as you folks know, a lot of people use false allegations to get the upper hand in this game to go on to divorce. So in Kentucky, they established legislation to just establish joint custody.
Again, I have to ask you to please go to your question at this point.
Yeah. So my question is, how does this joint custody, is that also the way to eliminating some of these problems in Canada?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. My long-winded question.
That's an easy one, but as questions come, there's efforts underway, I think, all over the world, at least where the Western world that I'm aware of, to enshrine something like rebuttable presumptions of equal parenting. I know we're very involved in a similar project in Canada for all the reasons, that your story so effectively demonstrates. Jean.
We try to push that agenda within 50-50 custody or parenting, it's called now. It's being resisted at many levels. In fact, was it here? It was mentioned earlier that there was a revamp of the Divorce Act a few years ago, and there were pressures from groups like ours trying to make it 50-50, but it was just tossed aside and it just went ahead the way it went. So just to let you know what's happening in Canada. That's pretty well.
There are some major forces against us, and what I did want to comment on briefly, because your story, Inder, really exemplifies how interconnected a lot of these men's issues are. I mean, the themes of parental alienation, fatherlessness, family court, false allegations, the role of women's shelters and how they kind of coached your ex-partner. The point is, first of all, that's why our organization is multi-issued. We're not a one-issue organization because somebody needs to connect the dots on all these things. But also, unfortunately, because of the interconnected web, we really need a mass movement of basically concerned citizens. We can't only seek to do a legislative project here or advocate on this policy there. We need tens of thousands of people to step up and make clear to their elected officials they're going to vote based on their position on issues X, Y, and Z. I know we want to kind of shortcut that by just going to our local MP in Canada, member of parliament, and getting some bill, forward. We need to do that. I'm just saying, if we don't have tens of thousands of Canadians or fellow travelers from other countries pushing for that, it's not going to go anywhere because we've tried it and it hasn't. So we need to build a mass movement. Conferences like these, organizations like they and many others represented here are trying to do that. You got to join with us. You got to join these organizations. You got to donate to these organizations. We need rich people to donate. We're competing with agencies that have tens of millions of dollars in annual budgets from government and other actors. We can't hope to compete if we don't have at least a similar level of resource, and we're nowhere near that right now. So we have our work cut out for us.
Yeah,
Can I take a question from the audience? Okay, we're going to go to somebody in the audience here now. Sorry to cut you off. Go ahead.
So the question is, so what's next for CAFE and CCMF? How do you see your organization in 10 years? Do you have any ambitious plans? And we could just mention it's so important. The government has so much funds to send to organizations and to have this kind of mainstream agenda. So what are the plans? How do you see going forward?
Yeah, thank you for that. I've spoken a lot. I want to see if Janice or Kevin want to take this one on, or at least give their first thoughts, and then I can offer a conclusion.
Can you repeat the question just so that I can hear it? It's a little quiet in the room, unfortunately.
Where are we in 10 years, Tanis?
I think in 10 years, I think we'll be seen as more of a respectable, agency where we're already gaining ground and that we have a lot of building of clientele, right? And I think in Alberta alone, we have had a 6-fold increase in services in the last 2 years. So I think that's only going to continue to grow. It shows no sign of slowing at all. So yeah, I think that in 10 years, we'll probably be hopefully in multiple more provinces as well. That would be a large aspiration of ours.
Well, I can't really speak for Cafe or the CCMF, but my hope is that as these issues become more and more mainstream, that Cafe will continue to support men's issues groups that decide to spring up in high schools or universities across the country. And now that Cafe is expanding, I remember they were just a local charity. Now they're, in other cities. As they expand across Canada, I see them expanding to a lot of the more local student groups there. That's my hope.
Thank you both. I share all those aspirations as well. I think we'll know that we have kind of hit mainstream status when the media to report on any of these gender issues think to themselves, we have to get this other perspective. We're not really doing our jobs and reporting, comprehensively on family violence or family breakup or mental health issues as it affects gender or COVID as it affects gender, et cetera, without looking at the statistics on male victimization or the impact on men, or talking to an agency that doesn't have to be ours, but talking to an agency, that has some credibility or some research that they can add to this discussion. Because right now, it almost never happens. And Sasha, I were talking about this the other day, whenever there are stories about violence against women, and we heard during COVID, that skyrocketed, there would always be this boilerplate at the bottom. Here's the contact for the local women's shelter, and 85% of victims are women. And that they would think their job's done as journalists. In 10 years, I'd like it to be the case that they know that they have to report these things in a balanced way. They know there's another side, or as I've been trying to say, it's not one side versus the other side. They know there's a fuller picture that they really need to capture. But organizationally, yeah, I'd love to have a network of centers and shelters, and men and boys and their families deserve all of that. We do need government funding to do any of these things. The organization has grown to the point where it's rather unwieldy, and to sustain it or to grow it, we definitely need some ongoing funding partnerships from some big wealthy players, whether that's philanthropists or corporate or government. We think we've come of age as an organization. We're now in a position where we have the best case for support we could ever marshal. We've had tens of thousands now of clients, and we've now had over a year of the shelter being operational. We've had over 50 families who stayed at this first of its kind men's shelter. Now we go to government and we say, don't make us shut this place down, because you'll be making victims of violence and their children homeless like overnight. So I think it's a very compelling narrative. I don't think we've ever had such a compelling narrative to bring to potential funders, but that's really critical. We have to compete in the big leagues, and for that we need resources. And isn't it interesting? I leave you on that note. So thank you very much for your attention. And I think before we close the session, there is a video, right, that we're going to roll of the last speaker. But our time here is done. So thanks, Tanis and Kevin, for joining me on this panel. Thanks all of you.
Thank you all so much. Thank you.